Hello everyone, my name is Kenton Kivestu. I'm an ex-BCG consultant, an ex-Googler, and the founder of RocketBlocks, which is an online platform that helps students prepare for case interviews. In today's RocketBlocks mini lesson, we're going to be talking about an incredibly important piece of context that you need before you even walk into your very first interview. And that is, what do firms like McKinsey, BCG, and Bain do in layman's terms? Now, this sounds like a super simple question, and in fact it is actually a very simple question, but the answer to it, as we're going to see, is a little more complex than you might think, and it's harder to get to than you might think as well. Now, before we even get to that, let's talk about why it's actually really important to understand the answer to this question fundamentally. And the reason for that is actually pretty simple. If you are interviewing for one of these firms, you want to be able to really understand at a deep level what they actually do, what their business model is, and why clients are paying them so much money and why this all works. So really understanding this is critical. If you have that type of understanding, it puts everything else into perspective. You'll better understand why these firms are using case interviews, why they test the type of skills they do. It all just makes sense. So let's take a look at how to get a good understanding of what these firms actually do. Now, the challenge is that if you say go ask a consultant, what does a firm like McKinsey or BCG do? They tend to give you the 20,000 foot high level answer, which is something akin to, well, we help our clients solve their most challenging problems. Okay, great. So that's useful in terms of directionally knowing what they do, but it doesn't provide a lot of detail. On the flip side, if you go look at, say, the McKinsey website or the BCG website and start reading about the different practice areas and the different industries they cover, it can become overwhelming, and it goes into the weeds and the details pretty quickly. So for example, I'm just going to read a quick snippet that I found on one of the practice homepages for BCG. This leads to an increase in organizational complicatedness, I'm not even sure that's a word, meaning number of procedures, vertical layers, interface structures, coordination bodies, and decision approvals. All of these internal complicatedness factors, okay, that's enough of that. I'm just going to pause there. So you can see that we go from a 20,000 foot answer to way in the weeds. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to put forth a framework for understanding the types of work that these companies do. That's going to help us kind of sort through all of these details that we find on somewhere like the website, and also put a more specific kind of structure in place for thinking about this than we're going to get from the 20,000 foot answer that we started with. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so now let's talk about the framework itself. The nice part about the framework is that it's really quite simple. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay out 3 buckets that encompass all the types of work that these firms commonly do. It won't capture 100% of cases, but it's going to get 95% plus of them easily. And it's going to allow you to think about what these firms do in a really structured manner that's going to help increase your understanding. So the framework is this. These firms basically do work in one of 3 buckets. The first is functional expertise. And what I mean by that is this is where the consulting firm is bringing their expertise and knowledge to bear on a specific problem that the client has. So for example, this might be McKinsey is bringing their pricing knowledge and expertise to bear on a pricing problem that the client has. So that's the first bucket, and we'll talk about each of these in detail, but we're just going to lay out the buckets first. So bucket number 1, functional expertise. Bucket number 2 is an objective opinion. And what I mean by this is where a consulting firm, the primary reason they're brought in is to be an objective third-party outsider, analyze a problem, and present a recommendation that either the board can review or the senior executive team at a company. But a lot of the value really comes from the fact that they are an objective third party analyzing the problem and providing their recommendation. So that's bucket number 2. And maybe this would be, like BCG is making a recommendation on whether company A should acquire another company or not. Okay, the third bucket is what I'm calling on-demand brains. And this is a case where a firm, the consulting firm is really hired to bring smart people to bear on a problem and turn around and answer really, really quickly when the client doesn't have the resources to do it themselves. So a really good example here is, a private equity firm hiring Bain to help them do due diligence on a company they're looking at acquiring. So we're going to talk about each of these in detail, but that is basically the framework. All the work that these firms do typically falls within one of these three buckets. So either they're bringing functional expertise to bear, they are driving an objective opinion for the company, or three, they're acting in a capacity where they're bringing on-demand brains to a challenging problem that the company has. Okay, so let's jump in and walk through all three of them. So let's dig into the first bucket, functional expertise. So this is the bucket where companies are really hiring these firms because they have significant built-up expertise and experience handling and dealing with certain types of challenges that are not in the wheelhouse of the hiring company itself. So for example, let's pretend there is an apparel retailer and they are increasingly worried about competing with Amazon and feel that from a data perspective, using the customer data that they built up over decades of operation is not their strength. Their strength is in branding, their strength is in marketing, maybe supply chain, predicting fashion trends and apparel trends, but using all their customer data and making sure they're doing it as efficiently as possible is not a strength. So that's the type of situation where you'd have a functional expertise case where someone like McKinsey, BCG, or Bain would be hired to help that company come up with a strategy for using their data, putting it to work in new ways, making sure that the central data infrastructure is set up correctly so that they can take advantage of it, make real-time decisions, etc. And so you can imagine how those type of functional expertise cases happen across a lot of different verticals. There might be a case where, say, an automotive company is looking at entering the Chinese market for the first time and needs help making sure that they price their cars correctly. That's a high stakes decision. They want to make sure they get it right. And so they bring in someone that's done a ton of pricing in the Chinese market, for example. And so, McKinsey or Bain or BCG could come in and help out with that. Or, maybe it is a consumer electronics firm that's merging with another consumer electronics firm. It's going to be a big merger. They haven't done big mergers like this before. They want someone like BCG or McKinsey to come help them do post-merger integration and make sure it goes as well as possible given that the stakes are so high. So there's a ton of different functional expertise scenarios that come up, but the key thing to think about in this bucket is that really the impetus for the company to hire the firm is that they realize the challenge they're facing is out of their wheelhouse, and they know that there are these highly respected, talented firms that have solved those type of problems over and over and over again for decades, and they can bring that expertise to bear. And so that is what a functional expertise case looks like. Bucket number 2 is objective opinion. Now this is a fun one because I think it's one that a lot of people outside of the industry misunderstand. And the reason is that they fail to realize that there is a true structural advantage that firms like McKinsey, BCG, and Bain have in that they are outsiders to their client firms. And that actually is really, really valuable. It means they can come in and provide an objective third-party decision in the case where that's really needed. So for example, imagine a CPG company, a large global CPG company, and they're considering making an acquisition in a new product space that they've never operated in before. Now, let's say in this case that the senior management of the CPG company is bullish on this acquisition and wants to move forward. But the board, however, is not convinced. They've got a slightly different opinion about the dynamics in that industry and what it takes to succeed in that product space. So this is one of those scenarios where McKinsey, BCG, or Bain could come in, study that same situation, and provide an objective third-party recommendation about which way they would go. And that's really useful because it can help break the logjam internally. Maybe it brings new issues to light, maybe they uncover something a little different, or they have a new framework or way of thinking about something that helps both parties actually reach a decision. Now that's really, really valuable, And it is distinct from functional expertise because remember, in this case, we're not talking about the company saying, look, we don't know how to evaluate this acquisition at all. This is just outside of our wheelhouse. The company is saying, look, we've done our analysis here, and we just have within the company the board thinks one thing and the senior management thinks the other. So we want a third-party objective opinion to come in and study the situation and make a recommendation. So that's really the key difference there. And it is something that the consulting firms structurally just have an advantage from doing because they are a different entity than the client firms themselves. Bucket number 3. This is the bucket that I call on-demand brains. And really what this bucket is all about is providing smart team members and, quote, brains quickly to the hiring company so that they can solve some sort of pressing problem that they're working through. Now, different than the first 2 buckets we talked about, this firm is not hiring the expert team because they don't have that functional expertise internally or because they need an objective opinion to break a logjam, but really why they're doing it is they have a plate of work that they've got and they've got a tight timeline they need to get it solved on, and they just don't have the resources internally to solve all those different aspects. So for example, the really kind of canonical case where this comes up here is a private equity due diligence case. You have a lean private equity firm that's looking at making a big acquisition, so the stakes are high, and they want to look at X, Y, and Z factors, and they just don't have enough resources internally to look at all of those in the timeline they need to. So, for example, they might bring in someone like Bain to help out do due diligence and look specifically at, say, maybe the market concentration and the market segmentation aspect of the problem and make a recommendation in that particular part to the private equity firm, which they can then use with the other factors that they were looking at to make an ultimate decision. So really here, the impetus and the reason that a company is hiring a consulting firm is because they need to augment their existing resources with a smart, kind of respected, trusted team, and they're going to give them a part of the problem or a big chunk of the problem that they're working on and expect them to kind of solve it and to do that quickly. And it's just much faster for them to hire someone externally and bring them in rather than trying to staff up and hire and actually onboard new employees themselves. Okay, so now you've got a framework for thinking about all the different types of casework that these consulting firms do. And no matter what the website says about 15 industry specialties and 12 capability practices, you now have a way for bucketing any of those cases that come up into a framework that's going to help you make sense of the full landscape. Now, occasionally, you might run into a case that does bleed over the edges a little bit. So for example, maybe there's a private equity case where it really does seem like it fits squarely in the on-demand brains bucket, but then you realize, the partner was hired because they also had a particular expertise that the PE firm was interested in for the acquisition they were looking at. That's okay. The world is a little bit messy, and occasionally these things will bleed over. But at least you've got a framework for thinking about it, and you kind of know how to classify that as well. And finally, if you think back to the very beginning of the video when we talked about that 20,000 foot answer that consultants love to give about what they do, well, we help our clients with their most challenging problems. Now you've got another layer deeper. You can really think about the types of problems that the clients are facing. What is the real situation and the motivation that they're hiring a consulting firm, and how that consulting firm then plugs in and really helps and adds value. So thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. There is a subscribe button below. If you haven't subscribed yet, we've got new videos on the interviewing process coming out weekly. So check them out. Thank you again for watching, and we will see you next time.